Good morning. Thanks, Lucille, for the time of prayer. It's good to see you. Thank you for being here. Welcome if you're watching us online. If you're here in the building, if you connected to our network before, not the public free Wi-Fi, but if you've got a phone and it's been connected at one point or another to our other network, we try to shut down all of the internet based on the fact that we have limited bandwidth. And if you're watching at home, we are praying that we get faster internet soon. There is big promises that Elon Musk is promising to deliver with Starlink. So if rural folks, you are in line like us, we're looking forward to the day we can not be, the electric cars where they have a worry that they're going to run out of battery. I always worry we're going to run out of bandwidth when we're gathered on a Sunday. It is good to be with you. I'm just so thankful for all the ways that we do see God working and in the midst of everything that's going on, and it is a privilege to be a follower of Christ, and maybe you're just you're in the middle of looking and checking out what it is about, but it is good to be together and to worship and focus our eyes on Jesus this morning. We're in the middle of a series looking at the idea of paradox. And a paradox really is something that at face value doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It almost looks like when you first encounter it that it's contradictory. And then as you take a closer look at paradox, it actually begins to make more sense the more that you get close and examine it. And so we have been looking at just one previous message so far, one of the paradox teachings of a few that we're going to look at of Jesus. And of course, Jesus, when he spoke and when he taught and when he engaged people, it was countercultural often to his day, and it was a upside down sort of looking kingdom. And so really, we actually last time I preached, we looked at the physical example of when you drop a very straight, nothing wrong with that pencil in that glass. But when you put it in there, what does it look like? It looks disjointed or crooked. And we know that it's straight, but here's the point. When you take God's perfect truth from heaven and you pass it through and down into this imperfect world, and we look at it from our very imperfect and human eyes, it sometimes looks crooked and a bit paradoxical, and it doesn't make sense to us. And often when Jesus taught, that's how people reacted to what seemed to them to be illogical, including his closest followers, his disciples. And sometimes even what Jesus would teach and say for the religious folks in his day seemed quite offensive. And yet for those who had ears to hear, they realized that they were hearing the perfect kind, the most pure, perfect kind of truth. In the previous paradox message that we looked at, we looked at losing is gaining based on the paradoxical teaching of Jesus. If you want to find yourself, what? Jesus says, well, you have to lose yourself. Now, if you missed any of those messages, that we do our best to live stream them. If you're watching online right now and it seems like the video or the audio, we do record them and we put them on our website under the services page. So if you missed last paradox teaching that Jesus talks about, we find ourselves as actually losing ourselves, you can check that out there. Today we're going to be looking at this paradox. This is serving is leading. If you really truly want to be great, especially as a leader, and here's the thing. This is my belief, is I believe that if you're following Jesus, that just that qualifies you to begin to lead, whether you're leading in an example to others, but just following Jesus, we are expected to lead in some way. And so Jesus would say, if you really truly want to be great, especially as a leader, you have to become a servant. Now listen, you might not even consider yourself or see yourself as a leader. I didn't for a long time growing up. I struggled with the idea that I would ever lead anything. But I, again, believe that God has called each of us who choose to follow Jesus to lead in some capacity. We're going to be looking at Gospel of Mark. If you've brought your Bibles with you, great. At home, it's in, there's a little tab beside the notes. I've put some notes in the notes tab there. But you can follow along also on the screen. And we're just going to dive right in to Mark chapter 10, verses 35 to 45. Then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to him. "Teacher," they said, "we want you to do for us whatever we ask." "Well, what do you want me to do for you?" he asked. They replied, "Let one of us sit at your right and the other at your left in your glory." "You don't know what you are asking," Jesus says. "Can you drink the cup I drink or be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with?" "We can," they answered. Jesus said to them, "You will drink the cup I drink and be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with. But to sit at my right or left is not for me to grant. These places belong to those for whom they have been prepared." When the 10 heard about this, they became indignant with James and John. Jesus called them together and said, "You know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many." So in this paradoxical teaching of Jesus, I've pulled 3 things out of the text, and I want to look at them. There's the typical way, the better way, and changing our ways. So there's a typical way we try to achieve in our society, in our culture, in our lives. There's a typical way that we try to achieve some form of greatness. And Jesus introduces us to a better way, and then there's going to be two ways. Given those 2 ways, what would it mean for us to begin to change our ways? So first, let's look at the typical way. The passage actually starts out with a conversation between Jesus and 2 of his disciples. They were brothers. They were referred to as the sons of thunder. And in our day, I can imagine these guys were maybe big guys, right? I mean, if you're going to be nicknamed the sons of thunder, there's some image there. I don't know. I picture a Harley with a leather jacket and the sons of thunder printed on the back or something. And so here they are. They've come to Jesus. I think those are awesome nicknames, but they come to him in private with this particular request. And I've always really been a bit fascinated with how they strike their request with Jesus, right? They just, "Teacher, we want you to do whatever we ask." And I think that's a bit presumptuous. We're going to ask you something, just say yes, okay? And I know my kids have used that approach before sometimes, but it's kind of funny. But it's also very revealing to where they're at. It seems like the sons of thunder had a sense of entitlement. It seemed like they viewed Jesus, who they were following, and they were his disciples, his followers. They felt maybe that he was a means to their wishes. And so Jesus says, "Well, what do you want me to do for you?" And they say, "Well, let one of us sit at your right hand and the other in your left in your glory." So they believed that pretty soon God's kingdom was going to come on earth as it was in heaven. They've been trying to track Jesus and understand what he's been talking about. And they had this idea that, okay, so if Jesus, who's going to be number 1 in the kingdom, there's no competition for his seat. But we think we should be number 2 and number 3. You've seen this before, right? This is sort of how we set up for power distribution, right? And they thought, okay, well, we can be number 2 and number 3. That's all. So all you have to do is say yes. And a bit of a side note here. Some people will actually dismiss the Gospels, believing that they were made up or maybe embellished, that the church actually invented some of the stories or all of them in an effort to advance its agenda. Well, I just love reading stories like this because here we have 2 of the followers of Jesus who will one day become prominent leaders in the church. And the Gospels are raw, they're unflattering at times to the top church leaders. And to me, it makes them much more believable. That here we have a story of two that would make this outrageous request, and Jesus sort of, in front of the friends there, he calls them out on it. But here's my question. What would drive somebody to ask that kind of a question? Well, it's really not hard for us, because all we have to do really is look in the mirror, right? This is a bit of a human human propensity for us to naturally be somewhat self-absorbed, self-promoting, maybe even at the same time self-doubting. But at the end of the day, we think a lot about ourselves. And when it comes to relating to the people around us, that self-focus tends to begin to show up, and it starts to come out, right? So there's two main ways that we're going to be looking at this morning, the typical way. Let's talk about those two things. It's competition and domination. By the way, I've been playing some pickleball here and there, and I'm not talking about competition in the healthy kind of sport, although there can be times on the pickleball court that competition becomes a bit on the unhealthy side. But it's great. I really enjoy that level of competition, but we're going to look at when it comes to the typical way of getting ourselves, promoting ourselves to greatness. So let's look at the first one, competition. If you were to turn back into Mark chapter 9, you would find that the disciples are there. They're beginning to argue about who would be what. They're arguing about who is going to be the greatest. And I don't know exactly, what the conversation was, and sometimes I like to picture what was that scene all about, right? Like maybe Matthew, he used to be a tax collector, and he could have been, listen, guys, I held a pretty decent job before. I was making a pretty good living, chief tax collector. I gave all of that up to follow Jesus, so, it's pretty impressive, you have to admit. But then maybe Judas would, retort back and say, "Listen, no. Jesus put me in charge of his money. I'm this treasurer here, so that probably means he trusts me more." And maybe Peter, I don't know exactly how it would have gone, but maybe Peter would have been thinking, "Okay, I'll just bide my time here." And then everybody's had a chance, and Peter might have said, "Well, guys, anybody walk on water?" Because I did that, and that's pretty impressive. And there they are, they're just arguing because their view of greatness, understand, their view of greatness was all about, how do I compare to you? How do I compare to you? Now, we all do this, right? I do this. We look at what other people might have or how they have accomplished things. It can be tempting for a pastor. Oh, there's so many more people going to his church or my church or whatever, right? There is in all of us this sense that we're trying to compare ourselves to another person. Pardon me. We have this habit of measuring our success by comparing it with other people's success. And we tend to get a sense of strength at times from other people's weakness. I like what C.S. Lewis says about it. He says it so well. He says, "Pride is essentially competitive. Pride gets no pleasure out of having something, only out of having more of it than the next man." We say that people are proud of being rich or clever or good-looking, but no. He says they're not. They're proud of being richer or cleverer or better looking than others. And this is human nature, he says. Pardon me, that's the end of the quote. But did you notice with those 10 disciples how they responded when they found out in the next chapter that James and John had gone and made that special private request? Did you catch that in the text? It says in verse 41, they were indignant, right? They were indignant. Verse 41, when the 10 heard about this, they became indignant with James and John, right? Like this righteous, how could you have possibly asked that question of Jesus? How could you do that? And you know why they were really mad, right? Because they had wished maybe that they had asked for those 2 seats as well. So our default way comes out in competition. And here's the other one. This is domination, and this looks ugly, right? In verse 42, so Jesus says, the rulers of the Gentiles, in other words, the secular approach to leadership in the world around them, is to dominate others. You get to tell people what to do, and they have to obey you. You're clearly above, they are clearly beneath. And the disciples of Jesus really didn't have to look far in their day to realize that there was this power structure all around them in the Roman Empire. The streets were filled with Roman soldiers who were well armed. But how about today? Do we ever see people around us through seeking greatness through domination? I believe that we do all the time. It can happen in politics. It can happen in school principals and bosses and police officers and parents and pastors. And it's the thinking that says, I feel good about myself based on the power I have over you. And so Jesus, he calls his disciples together and he says, listen, we all know that secular leadership works through domination. So why would he bring this up with his disciples? Because when he heard James and John make that request, Jesus, and he knows their heart as well, but he realizes and he wants to have a teaching moment here with them that they actually had a warped perception and concept of leadership. They wanted to be the ones in that position of domination. There's a Bible scholar, David Garland, and he says, they hope to replace the self-serving, oppressive power structure of the Romans with their own self-serving, oppressive power structure. Nothing changes except the names of the rulers. Oppressive power gets recycled and new tyrants rise on the scene. The worldly ambition to be at the top and to beat down others still rules. And so I think, maybe you see this as well. James and John remind me a lot of us. When we think about leadership, when we think about being successful and what we want in life, our natural propensity is to approach it with competition and domination. And frankly, that's one of the biggest problems in life, in our dissatisfaction with life. Alan Redpath said this. He says, let me get there. The secret of every discord in Christian homes and communities and churches is that we seek our own way and our own glory. And just think about that. You know, maybe that's been your experience and your reality at times. The reason there's oftentimes discord, tension, or stress in and around us in our homes, in our businesses, and in our churches is because a lot of times we can become just like James and John, trying to compete and dominate. And some of us at times do that more aggressively, some a little more passive aggressively, but it always ends badly. And I think one of the most important lines in this whole verse, I love it. Jesus says this. He says, but not so with you. You know, that's the way that the world and the kingdoms of this world operate and work, but not so with you. Because you're my followers, we do things differently. If you and I are really following Jesus or seeking to follow him, then the way that we handle power and leadership must begin to take on a totally different way than the rest of the world does. And that leads me to point number 2, the better way. James and John thought the path to success was through this competitiveness, competition, and domination. And Jesus gives them a radically different view and approach. He says, no, actually, the best kind of life, the best kind of leadership comes through two things, serving and suffering. And at face value, again, this cup comes up. He says, Father, if it's possible, take this cup, right? And so cup represents in Scripture suffering. And also when Jesus references baptism, that's similar meaning in this context. And he's saying, you know, guys, you're asking for this prominent position, these positions in my kingdom, but those positions just don't get handed out. They always come through suffering. And sometimes we seek a high position because we like that prestige and that place of honor that comes with that role. But just like James and John, we don't know really, at the end of the day, what we're asking. We've got no concept of the pain and the suffering that accompany the leadership that Jesus is trying to teach them about. Because here's what I've found, and maybe you've found this as well. When you're in a leadership role, man, it can be really painful at times, right? When you're a leader, whether it's pastor or manager or a parent or a teacher, if you're doing your job well, it comes with a little bit of suffering, right? Because you're making hard decisions that end up impacting the people's lives that you're leading. You're being criticized on a regular basis. You might even feel, as a leader, this enormous pressure of people's expectations. And leadership, in many ways, is painful. It comes with the territory. So let me ask you something. Are you, in your area of leadership, whatever that looks like, are you experiencing pain and maybe a wee little bit of stress or sacrifice? Don't be surprised by that. As we follow Jesus and he leads us, that's sort of part of the cup that we will drink as leaders. And Jesus would look to the Father and pray, but not my will, but yours be done. And in those moments where you're feeling like you're being stretched as a leader and it's painful and it's difficult, we come to the Father and we just have to pray, not my will, but yours be done. I love what Paul says in Colossians. He says this, Colossians chapter 1. I'm behind on my, there we go. Now I rejoice in what I am suffering for you, and I fill up in my flesh what is still lacking in regard to Christ's afflictions for the sake of his body, which is the church. Notice two things. First, the purpose of Paul and his sufferings. He says, I am suffering for you. And then he says, I am suffering for the sake of his body, which is the church. So when we suffer, as we lead, it's not just pain for the sake of pain, okay? It's always done for the sake of those that we are leading, for the sake of others. Just like the sufferings of Jesus were for us and for our good, we as leaders suffer for others and for the good of people we're called to leave. And because of that, here's the second thing Paul says, I rejoice in what I am suffering. When you're staying up with a sick kid half the night, maybe it's taking your elderly father to the hospital, whatever it could look like, it's coming in maybe early to your classroom and giving extra help to students that need it. Those are all acts in leadership that involve sacrifice and a certain level of pain in our lives. But you and I, we can rejoice in it, in knowing that it's for the good of others. So this is a countercultural vision that Jesus lays out of greatness in his kingdom. It's not an easy life. It involves suffering. But on the next thing here, it involves serving. Serving. And maybe you've heard that term before, servant leadership. Right? Well, Jesus wants to teach his disciples about this. He says, all about secular leadership, the way the Gentiles lord. It's about lording your position over people and dominating them. But look what he says next. He says, not so with you. Instead, if you want to be one of my disciples, not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to be great among you must be your servant. Verse 44, and whoever wants to be first must be slave of all. In other words, if you really want to achieve in this life a level of greatness as they were after, stop viewing people as competition and to be dominated, and start viewing everyone that you come in contact to, as Jesus did, as precious people to be served. I remember when we first moved to Manitoba, we had Levi, and that was it. We had just moved into an apartment, a small one, and then came along Lydia, and we realized that our family was growing and we were going to have to look for a place. And we were very blessed. God opened up an opportunity for us to purchase a home in Selkirk, and it was a very dated home. And I remember being new and not knowing anybody. I remember Gary came and helped us figure out how to put down hardwood floor. And I remember people giving of their time to scrape the ceiling. You remember that? It was just messy. I mean, we had so much. We were sleeping downstairs in the basement so that we could actually get in there, move in, and begin to do all of this work. And there's a lot of work. And what sticks out in my mind was those people who showed up. And they gave of their time and their talent and their generosity. And over and over and over again, I remember people coming alongside of me and showing me care and showing us generosity and praying for us. And they continue to do that. But you know what's interesting? We remember the people who serve us. I mean, that was 10 plus years ago. And I clearly remember. And I'm still so grateful. So sometimes that's what serving looks like. counseling a coworker, staying late on a shift to kind of sit and listen and be with them. Washing the dishes for your spouse, taking an elderly parent to get their errands done. And it's going to take you a really long time to get it all done. It's like when Jesus washed the feet of his disciples, right? Jesus was showing you giving up your right, giving up your convenience to meet the needs of others. And you know what? Even though there's some suffering that is involved in that, it can be rewarding when we do that, because we know that people appreciate that. Now listen, sometimes there isn't always this immediate reward. It makes me think of raising kids. Maybe you've been there, maybe not, but it could be even walking into your 12-year-old's room and you see empty cereal bowls and pop cans and right, and you want him or her, leave, I'm not blaming you on your messy room, but you want them to be able to actually go in there and clean it, because the temptation as a parent, let me tell you this, is to just say, well, as a leader, I'm going to sacrifice, I'm going to experience a little bit of pain here, I'm just going to tidy the room up, and it's just going to be so noble and Christ-like. But really, if we're looking for an opportunity to lead, that might gain us short-term approval, perhaps, and getting them to clean it up doesn't make you very popular, but it really is truly serving their needs. So when you think of service, make sure you don't have that narrow definition of what serving means, right? And it means sacrificing your convenience for the good of others, and that sometimes takes different forms. Jesus says to his disciples, whoever wants to be great, in other words, he doesn't rebuke them for having a desire to move towards greatness, to achieve it, but they had come to understand that it came through competition and domination. And Jesus, what he does again and again is he flips that upside down and he says, no, it's through suffering and serving. It's really a paradox to the way they had always thought. Because suffering and serving, even when we look at the life of Jesus, it sometimes at face value, suffering and serving looks like failure. Suffering and serving looks like really the role of the servant or the slave, not a leader. And Jesus is saying, nope, that's the path to greatness. So how do we begin to align our life and our way of living to the way of Jesus? And this brings us to the last point, changing our way. So the key, it really is in verse 45, and this is the verse that you really should memorize if you haven't already, but Jesus says, for even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. So it's basically quite simple and at the same time very difficult for us, right? In this world, in our pursuit of the things that we want to be self-promoting or whatever, Jesus is saying, simply focus on him. Keep your eyes on Jesus. And this works two different ways, right? When I think about this and the text and what we learn about Jesus. One is through Jesus' example. Because we become like the people that we look to and we idolize and we sort of fixate on and admire, right? And Jesus says, I'm not just telling you to do this. I'm not just issuing commands from my throne, but I'm saying follow my example. Even I didn't come to be served, but to serve. And we see that all the time in the life of Jesus. We see it when he washes the feet of his disciples. We see it when he's allowing himself to be interrupted in throughout his day. And most awesomely, what we see in Jesus as he serves and he gives his life is when he lays it down for our salvation on the cross. And so the example of Jesus, but I'm praying for your power to fill me and flow through me and change me into a servant like you, because that's the kind of leadership where actually Jesus is talking about. And it doesn't come naturally. And it takes the power of Christ in us to pull it off. So here as we close, I would like to suggest three practical ways for us to live this out. Rethink the purpose of your position. Do you remember watching a long time ago, the movie Braveheart? The main character, Mel Gibson, okay, he comes, it's William Wallace. He comes to this group of Scottish nobles, right? They're fighting together for the independence of Scotland from England. And he approaches them. They're Scottish men. They've got a bit of, they're basically functioning a lot like puppets for the English government. And they've got these comfy, cozy positions, right? And so William Wallace, he says to this one noble, he says, you think, and I was tempted to use a Scottish accent, but I'm not gonna, because that always ends badly, right? But it's so tempting okay, anyway. You think the people of this country exist to provide you with position. I think your position exists to provide those people with freedom. And I think that my position exists to provide people with freedom. I mean, those are powerful words to be reminded of, that it applies no matter what position of leadership that we have, but particularly as we follow Jesus, that we would have that mindset. He says, you're not there to be served. You're there to serve. Second thing that helps practically for us in this, show genuine interest in others. There's a passage that I love from Philippians, and Paul, before we read it, he's talking about position and how we should be relating to other people. So before I read it, just think about where you're at in your life, in your own position or positions of leadership, and think about whether you're as a grandparent or father or mother or teacher or boss. As you think about that role, I want to read this, Philippians chapter 2, 3-4. And it's on the screen. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves. Verse 4, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of the others. Showing genuine interest in others. And the third thing is become a giver. Gary's talked about this author. His name's Adam Grant, and he's written a book called Give and Take, right? And so Adam Grant, he's a researcher and at Wharton School of Business. And in his research, he's identified in the workplace, and certainly in other places, but he's basically said that there's three kinds of workers: takers, matchers, and givers. And actually, it's really great that we talk about this at the leadership level, because this is pertinent to the paradox here that Jesus is teaching about. Takers view the workplace as a very competitive place. Like if I don't look out for myself, then no one is going to look after me. Matchers believe in this idea that everybody, we work in exchanging of favors, right? If I do something for you, that's match, because you're going to end up, helping me out, and you'll owe me that favor. And givers choose to focus on the needs of others without worrying about how they're going to get something in return. So takers, matchers, and givers. And it's interesting, in the research, what he discovered is, do you know how many, or what the percentage is, let me find my place, what the percentage of people actually functioning as givers at their workplace in their roles? He says only about 8%. Only about 8%. Because most people just assume that if you are a giver, you're being too nice, you'll never get anywhere at work. Their first instinct is sort of to revert to that taker mentality. But here's the aha in Adam's research. His research consistently shows that givers are among the most successful people in business. And very often, they're the most satisfied, most happy. And I'll bet for many of you and myself, if you look back on your own career, in your own life, I bet you that there has been a person who was a giver in your life. And it's a beautiful thing when that happens. When you get up out of your office and you move to spend extra time with someone in the organization because someone has actually spent the time to do that in your life. And now it's time for you to be a giver and to expend all of that energy to the success of others. And it's rewarding to be a giver. But in the eyes of the world, greatness really is all about competition and domination, promoting yourself, grabbing the best seats. And James and John, disciples of Jesus, they had fallen into just that kind of way of thinking. And if you and I really are honest, we can admit that oftentimes we are like James and John. Jesus, and he looks at all of us, and he says, not so with you. Whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be a slave to all. So rethink the purpose of your position, show genuine interest in others, become a giver. Serving is leaving. It's a paradox, but it's true. Would you close in prayer with me this morning? Lord Jesus, thank you for the scriptures that are very raw and walk us through the lessons that you taught your disciples, and they're so relevant and important for us today because we want to follow you. And you say, this is the way that the world does, not so with you. And so we want to submit to you. We want to lay it all down. We want to follow you even when it doesn't always all make sense. Give us your power flowing through our lives as we follow you and your example. Lord, I thank you for each person here, that we would continue to grow in our areas of leadership, begin to take risks of being givers and thinking of the interests of others, that you would multiply that, you would bless it, and you would begin to do an amazing work in and through our interactions with people. Thank you for this day. Pray that you would bless us and our time as we head out and take time to rest on this day, your day. And we bless your name. We thank you, and we pray it in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. God bless you as you head out this day.